You look like a laborer. Steak must be a luxury for you. A customer sneered, sparking laughter across the diner. Everyone saw him as a poor nobody, unworthy of proper service. But when the waitress quietly placed down the plate of steak, along with a trembling note that read, "If you really are who I think you are, please save me," his entire world shifted. In that moment, an ordinary dinner became a turning point that would change everything. Her name was Olivia. She was 26, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her diner uniform faded from too many washes. She moved quietly, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor, her hands quick but careful as she set down plates. Her face was striking, but not in a way that screamed for attention. No makeup, no jewelry, just clear eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. She didn't smile much, not because she was cold, but because she carried a weight nobody else could see. The diner was a rundown spot on the edge of New York, the kind of place where truckers and locals grabbed coffee and eggs, and the air always smelled like grease and yesterday's fries. Olivia had been working there for 2 years longer than most. Nobody asked why she stayed. Nobody cared enough to ask. The man at the table, the one they were laughing at, sat alone near the window. He was 45, his face weathered but not rough, his shirt old but clean, his jacket plain enough to blend in. His name was Daniel, though nobody in the diner knew it. He kept his eyes on the menu when the first jab came, his finger steady on the plastic laminate. The laughter didn't make him flinch. He'd heard worse. Olivia caught his eye as she approached her notepad. Ready, her expression neutral, but soft, like she was trying to apologize for the room without saying it. She didn't know him. Not really, but she'd seen something, a flicker in how he carried himself, a quiet confidence that didn't match his clothes. That's why she wrote the note. That's why her hands shook as she slid it under his plate. "Hey, if this story's hitting you, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to share these moments with you, to walk through these stories together. Let's keep going." The diner was half full that evening, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting a harsh glow on the chipped formica tables. A group of regulars sat at the counter, their voices loud, their plates piled with burgers and onion rings. One of them, a guy in a flashy watch and a polo shirt too tight for his gut, was the first to throw a jab. "Hey, buddy, you sure you can afford that steak?" he called out, grinning like he'd just won a prize. His buddies chuckled, leaning back in their stools, their eyes flicking to Daniel for a reaction. A woman at a nearby booth, her nails painted red and her purse screaming designer, joined in. "Probably his big night out," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Hope you saved up for it, hon." The room laughed again, the sound sharp and mean like glass breaking. Olivia kept her head down as she poured coffee at another table, but her shoulders stiffened. She didn't look at Daniel, didn't dare draw more attention to him or herself. The other waiters, a couple of guys in their 20s with slicked-back hair and smirks, leaned against the counter watching her. "She's wasting her time on that guy," one of them muttered loud enough for her to hear. "Betty leaves her a quarter if she's lucky." The other one snorted, wiping a glass with a rag. "Yeah, Olivia, don't get your hopes up. He's probably eating his rent money." The customers nearby laughed harder, their voices piling on each one, trying to outdo the last. Olivia's jaw tightened, but she didn't say a word. She just moved to the next table, her hands steady, her face blank. A teenage girl, maybe 17, sat in the corner booth with her parents, her phone propped up against a ketchup bottle, filming the whole scene. Her giggles carried across the diner as she zoomed in on Daniel's worn jacket. "This guy's straight out of a thrift store," she said, her voice high and mocking, loud enough for her parents to chuckle. She tilted her phone toward Olivia, catching her as she refilled a water glass. And look at her serving him like he's somebody. Total loser vibes. Her mother, decked out in a pearl necklace, leaned over. "Put that away, sweetie, but you're not wrong. She's got no sense of who to prioritize." Olivia's hand paused on the pitcher water, sloshing slightly, but she kept her eyes down, her face a mask of calm. The teenager kept filming her laughter, sharp and relentless. Daniel didn't react to the noise. He cut into his steak, the knife moving slow and deliberate, like he was savoring every bite. But his eyes went to the note again, tucked under the edge of his plate. He unfolded it carefully, his fingers brushing the creased paper. "If you really are who I think you are, please save me." The words were written in blue ink, the handwriting small and uneven, like she'd scribbled it in a hurry. He glanced up at Olivia, who was clearing plates at a booth across the room. Her eyes met his for a split second, and in that moment there was a plea, raw, desperate, but controlled. She didn't linger. She turned away, wiping down the table, her movements quick but precise. The room didn't notice the exchange. They were too busy piling on. A guy in a suit, his tie loosened and his face flushed from one too many beers, leaned back in his chair. "What's a guy like that even doing in here?" he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "This ain't a soup kitchen, pal." His friend, a skinny guy with a goatee and a gold chain, laughed so hard he choked on his fries. "Maybe he's lost," he said, wiping his mouth. Betty thought this was the dollar menu joint down the road. The laughter spread a wave of it, cruel and easy, like they were all in on the same joke. Olivia's hands paused on the rag she was using, her knuckles whitening for just a moment before she kept wiping. At the counter, a woman in a bright pink tracksuit, her hair teased high and her makeup caked on, leaned toward the waiter taking her order. "You let anyone in here now, huh?" She said, her voice loud and accusing, like she was personally offended by Daniel's presence. "That guy's dragging the whole place down." "And her." She jerked her head toward Olivia. "She's acting like he's some VIP. Ridiculous." The waiter smirked, nodding as he scribbled her order. "Yeah, she's always been a little too nice to the wrong people." Olivia overheard her fingers tightening on the coffee pot she was holding, but she didn't turn around. She just poured another cup, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was forcing herself to stay steady. Daniel stayed calm, his fork moving to his mouth, his eyes steady. But under the table, his other hand reached for the pen in his pocket. He flipped the note over and wrote his handwriting, small and neat, I know. "Tell me everything." When Olivia came back to refill his water, he slid the note across the table, his fingers brushing hers just enough to pass it without anyone noticing. She didn't look at it right away. She just tucked it into her apron, her face still blank, and moved to the next table. But her steps were a little slower now, like she was carrying something heavier than before. A man in a construction vest, his hands rough and his boots caked with mud, sat at a table near the door. He'd been quiet until now, but he leaned forward to his voice gruff. "Hey, waitress, focus on the real customers, not that bum," he called out, pointing at Daniel. The room erupted in laughter again, heads turning to see Olivia's reaction. She froze for a split second, her tray wobbling in her hands, but she caught it before anything fell. "I'm working," she said, her voice low but firm, her eyes flicking to the man before she turned away. The construction guy scoffed, shaking his head. "Work faster, then? Some of us actually pay our bills." The laughter grew sharp and biting, and Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line as she moved to the next table. The diner's owner, a guy named Rick, chose that moment to make his entrance. He was a big man, his shirt stretched tight over his belly, his face red from years of yelling and cheap whiskey. He swaggered out from the kitchen, his eyes scanning the room like he owned every soul in it. "How's the steak, poor man?" he said, stopping by Daniel's table, his voice loud and mocking. He slapped Olivia on the shoulder as she passed hard enough to make her stumble. "Hurry up, girl, or I'll dock your pay. Don't waste time on this guy." The customers laughed again, their voices blending into a single ugly sound. Rick grinned, soaking it up, his hand still lingering on Olivia's shoulder a second too long. Olivia didn't flinch, but her lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped away from Rick, her tray balanced in her hands, and went back to work. Daniel watched her go, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The way he set his fork down, slow and deliberate, said enough. The room didn't notice, though. They were too busy enjoying the show. A woman at the counter, her hair bleached blonde and her earrings dangling, leaned toward her friend. "She's got a thing for him, doesn't she?" she said, her voice loud and fake sweet. "Poor girl chasing a nobody like that." Her friend cackled, stirring her coffee. "Bet she thinks he's her knight in shining armor. Good luck with that, sweetie." As Olivia passed a table near the window, a businessman in a crisp white shirt looked up from his laptop. "Sweetheart, you're wasting your energy on that guy," he said, his voice smooth but condescending, like he was giving her life advice. "Stick to serving people who belong here." He gestured vaguely at Daniel, his lips curling into a smirk. Olivia stopped, her hand resting on the back of a chair, her fingers tightening for just a moment. "Everyone belongs here," she said, her voice quiet but sharp, cutting through the chatter. The businessman blinked, caught off guard, and the table fell silent. Olivia didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her sneaker squeaking, leaving the man staring after her, his smirk gone. Olivia heard every word. Her hands shook as she stacked plates, but she didn't turn around. She just kept moving, her sneakers squeaking on the floor, her apron pocket heavy with the note. When she passed Daniel's table again, she leaned in close, pretending to clear his empty glass. "The owner keeps our IDs," she whispered, her voice low and steady. "Traps us in debt. We can't leave." She didn't wait for a response. She straightened up, grabbed a rag, and started wiping down a table like nothing had happened. Daniel's eyes darkened, but his face stayed calm. He took another bite of his steak, chewing slowly like he was just another customer passing through. The room kept going, oblivious. A guy in a leather jacket, his hair slicked back and his boots polished, leaned over to his buddy. "She's too good for this dump," he said, nodding at Olivia. "But hanging around that guy, she's got no standards." His buddy laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, what's she thinking? Guy looks like he's one step from the street." The words cut through the air, sharp and careless, and Olivia's shoulders tensed again. She didn't look up. She just kept wiping the table, her hands moving in tight, controlled circles. Daniel's fingers tightened on his fork, but he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The note was burning a hole in his pocket. A woman in a floral dress, her glasses perched on her nose, sat at a booth with a stack of papers, grading them with a red pen. She looked up as Olivia passed, her voice sharp and teacherly. "You know, dear, you'd do better if you didn't waste time on people like him," she said, nodding toward Daniel. "Focus on the customers who matter." Olivia paused, her tray balanced on one hip, and looked at the woman. "I focus on everyone," she said, her voice, even her eyes, steady. The woman huffed, shaking her head, and went back to her papers. The customers nearby chuckled, but it was quieter now, like they sensed something shifting. Olivia moved on. Her steps measured her face, calm but unyielding. The diner's noise didn't let up. The clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, it all blended into a wall of sound. But something shifted when a new customer walked in. He was young, maybe 30, with a sharp suit and a smirk that said he knew he was better than everyone else. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Daniel. "Who let this guy in?" he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "This place is going downhill." The regulars laughed, their heads turning to follow his gaze. The guy in the suit didn't stop. He walked right up to Daniel's table, leaning in close. "You lost, buddy. This ain't your kind of place." He reached for the note on the table, his fingers brushing the edge of it. Daniel's hand moved faster, sliding the note out of reach. "It's mine," he said, his voice low and even. The guy in the suit froze, his smirk faltering for a second, before he laughed it off. "Whatever, man. Keep your trash." Olivia saw it all. She was at the counter now, pouring coffee for a trucker, but her eyes flicked to Daniel's table. Her hands shook again, just enough for a drop of coffee to spill on the counter. She wiped it up quickly, her face still blank, but her movements were sharper now, like she was holding herself together with every ounce of strength she had. The room didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy piling on. The woman with the red nails leaned over to her friend. "Betty's writing her love notes," she said, her voice loud and mocking. "How cute is that? The broke guy and the broke waitress." Her friend snorted, shaking her head. Pathetic. She could do better. An older man, his hair gray and his jacket patched at the elbows, sat alone at a small table, nursing a cup of coffee. He'd been watching the room quietly, his eyes sharp despite his age. When Olivia passed, he reached out, his voice low but kind. "Don't let them get to you, kid," he said, his hand brushing her arm. "You're better than this place." Olivia stopped, her tray still in her hands, and looked at him. For a moment, her face softened, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thanks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved on, but her steps were a little lighter, like his words had steadied her. The old man watched her go, then glanced at Daniel, his eyes narrowing slightly like he saw something nobody else did. Daniel didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. The message he typed was short, just a string of numbers and letters, but it was enough. He hit send and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Olivia caught the movement, her eyes flicking to him for just a second before she turned away. She didn't know what he'd done, but she knew it meant something. She could feel it in the way he sat, the way his shoulders squared just a little, the way his eyes didn't waver when they met hers. A young couple at a booth near the counter, both in matching college sweatshirts, started whispering loudly, their eyes on Olivia. The girl, her hair in a tight ponytail, leaned forward. "She's probably desperate, sticking around that guy," she said, her voice carrying a mean edge. "Look at her running back and forth for him." "Sad?" Her boyfriend nodded, smirking. "Yeah, she's gotta know. He's not worth it. Betty's just stringing her along." Olivia's hand froze on a ketchup bottle. She was refilling her fingers, tightening until her knuckles turned white. She set the bottle down, her movements slow, and walked away without a word. The couple didn't notice, but Daniel did. His jaw tightened just for a moment before he took another sip of water. Minutes later, the diner's windows rattled. Black SUVs pulled up outside, their engines low and heavy, their headlights cutting through the dusk. The customers stopped talking, their forks pausing halfway to their mouths. The guy in the suit frowned, leaning toward the window. "What the hell's that?" he muttered. The regulars at the counter turned, their faces curious, but not yet alarmed. Olivia froze her hand on a coffee pot. Her eyes locked on the door. Rick, the owner, stepped out from the kitchen, his grin fading as he saw the vehicles. "What's going on?" He barked, his voice sharp but unsteady. The door swung open and 3 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't rush, didn't shout, but their presence filled the room like a storm cloud. One of them carried a briefcase, his face all business, his eyes scanning the diner until they landed on Daniel. The other 2 stood by the door, their hands clasped in front of them, their postures rigid. The customers stared, their laughter gone, their voices replaced by a low murmur. The guy in the flashy watch leaned back, his eyes wide. "Who are these guys?" he whispered to his buddy, who just shook his head. Olivia set the coffee pot down, her hands steady now, but her breath caught in her throat. A waitress named Carla, older than Olivia and hardened by years in the diner, had been watching from the sidelines. She stepped forward now, her arms crossed, her voice sharp. "What's this, some kind of stunt?" she said, glaring at Daniel. "You're not fooling anyone, buddy. Take your little act somewhere else." The customers nodded, their murmurs growing louder, feeding off her skepticism. Olivia glanced at Carla, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't speak. Instead, she picked up a stack of menus and started straightening them. Her movements calm but deliberate, like she was bracing for what came next. Carla's words hung in the air, but Daniel didn't flinch. He just folded his napkin, his hands steady, his eyes on the agents. Daniel stood slow and deliberate and shrugged off his jacket. Underneath, his shirt was plain, but pinned to the collar was a small silver insignia. A crest nobody in the diner recognized, but it carried weight. The man with the briefcase stepped forward, handing Daniel a stack of papers. "Sir, everything's ready," he said, his voice low but clear. Daniel nodded, his eyes flicking to Olivia for a moment before he turned to the room. "As of today," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this establishment belongs to me." The words landed like a bomb, quiet but devastating. The room went still, the air thick with disbelief. Rick's face drained of color. "No," he stammered, stepping forward. "You're just a poor customer. This is my place." His voice cracked, and he looked around like he was waiting for someone to back him up. The guy in the suit laughed nervously, shaking his head. "This is fake," he said, but his voice was weaker now, less sure. The woman with the red nails stared at her plate, her fingers twitching on her purse. The waiters who'd mocked Olivia stood frozen behind the counter, their smirks gone, their eyes darting to the floor. Olivia didn't move. She just stood there, her hands folded in front of her, her face unreadable. A delivery driver who'd just walked in with a crate of soda cans stopped dead in his tracks. He looked from Daniel to the agents, his mouth half open. "Wait, you're saying that this guy owns this place?" he said, his voice loud with disbelief. He set the crate down with a thud, shaking his head. "No way. I've been dropping off here for years. That's not how it works." The customers nodded, their whispers starting up again, clinging to their doubt. Olivia's fingers twitched, but she stayed silent, her eyes on Daniel. He didn't respond to the driver. He just signed the papers, his pen moving with a quiet authority that made the room feel smaller. Daniel didn't look at Rick. He didn't need to. He turned to Olivia, his voice softening but still carrying that same quiet authority. "You're no longer a servant here," he said. "From now on, you're the manager." The words hung in the air, heavy and real. Olivia's eyes widened just for a second before she nodded, her lips pressing together. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room was silent now, the laughter gone, the mockery replaced by a stunned, uneasy quiet. The guy in the leather jacket looked away, his face red. The woman with the bleached hair fiddled with her earrings, her hands shaking. The teenage girl with the phone stopped filming, her hands trembling as she shoved the device into her pocket. Her mother grabbed her arm, whispering sharply, "Delete that video now." The girl's face flushed, her fingers fumbling as she opened her phone, but the damage was done. The clip had already been uploaded and comments were pouring in, calling out the diner's cruelty. Olivia didn't see it, but she felt the shift in the room, the way the air grew heavy with guilt. She picked up a rag and started wiping the counter. her movement slow and steady, like she was claiming the space as her own. The teenager's mother avoided her eyes, pulling her daughter closer. A journalist in the corner, a guy with glasses and a notepad, who'd been scribbling the whole time, stood up. Why her? He called out, his voice sharp and skeptical. Why rescue a nobody waitress? A few customers nodded their whispers, starting up again. The guy in the flashy watch muttered, "This is just cheap PR. Has to be." The woman with the red nails glanced up, her eyes narrow. "She's just a waitress," she said, her voice low but loud enough to carry. Olivia's hands trembled just for a moment before she clasped them together. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She stood tall, her chin lifted, waiting. Daniel turned to the journalist, his gaze steady. "She's the only person in this room brave enough to ask for help," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "That makes her worth more than anyone else here." The agents behind him straightened, their faces unreadable, but their presence a silent salute. The journalist sat down, his pen still. The customers looked away, their faces burning with shame. Olivia's hands stopped trembling. She took a breath, slow and deep, and her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. The room felt different now, like the air had shifted, like the truth had finally caught up. The woman in the floral dress, still clutching her red pen, dropped it on the table, her hands shaking. She gathered her papers in a rush, her glasses slipping down her nose. "I didn't mean anything by it," she muttered, her voice barely audible as she shoved her things into a bag. Nobody responded. The room was too quiet, the weight of Daniel's words still sinking in. Olivia glanced at her just for a moment before turning back to the counter. The woman's face burned red as she hurried out, her papers spilling onto the floor. Nobody helped her pick them up. She'd been part of the chorus of mockery, and now she was alone. The fallout came quick. Rick was escorted out by the agents, his protests fading as the door swung shut behind him. The guy in the suit got a call later that night. His company dropped him as a client, his name tied to the diner's exploitation in a news article that spread like wildfire. The woman with the red nails lost her sponsorship deal with a local boutique. Her comments in the diner, recorded by the journalist, didn't sit well with her followers. The waiters who'd mocked Olivia were let go, their names blacklisted in every decent restaurant in the city. It wasn't revenge. It was just the world turning, the scales balancing. Nobody said it out loud, but they all felt it. The young couple in the college sweatshirts slipped out quietly, their heads down, their sweatshirts subtly looking childish in the harsh diner light. The girl's ponytail bounced as she hurried to the door, her boyfriend trailing behind, his smirk long gone. A notification pinged on her phone as they left. The friend had tagged her in a post, calling her out for her comments in the diner. She didn't look at it. She just shoved her phone into her pocket and kept walking, her face pale. Olivia didn't notice. She was too busy checking the register, her fingers moving with a new confidence, like she was finally where she belonged. Olivia didn't gloat. She didn't turn back to stare at the people who'd laughed at her. She just walked to the counter, picked up a clipboard, and started going over the day's receipts. Her hands were steady now, her movements sure. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence said it all. The diner was hers now, not just in name but in spirit. The customers who stayed didn't meet her eyes. They ate quietly, their voices low, their laughter gone. The agents left their SUVs pulling away into the night. Daniel sat back down, his steak half-eaten, and watched Olivia work. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Years ago, Olivia had stood in a different kind of room. A big house, all polished wood and chandeliers, where her mother had taught her to stand straight, to speak softly, to never let the world see her bend. She'd grown up with wealth, with power, but she had walked away from it. Not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted to be her own person. She had traded silk dresses for a diner uniform, traded boardrooms for greasy tables. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. But every time someone mocked her, every time they looked at her like she was nothing, she carried that truth inside her. She didn't need to prove it. She just needed to keep going. The old man who'd spoken to Olivia earlier lingered at his table, his coffee long gone cold. He watched her now, his eyes crinkling with something like pride. As he stood to leave, he left a folded bill under his cup. Not a tip, but a note of his own, written on a napkin. "You're stronger than they know it." Read. Olivia found it later, her fingers tracing the words, her lips curving into the faintest smile. She tucked it into her apron next to Daniel's note and went back to work. The old man's words stayed with her, a quiet anchor in the chaos of the night. Now, standing behind the counter, she was still that same woman. Not a victim, not a hero, just Olivia. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing the edge of the note still in her apron. She didn't need it anymore, but she kept it a reminder of the moment she'd dared to ask for help. The diner was quiet now, the air heavy with the weight of what had happened. The customers who stayed finished their meals and left their heads down, their voices silent. The journalist packed up his notepad, his story already taking shape. The woman with the bleached hair slipped out her earrings, catching the light one last time. Daniel stood to leave his jacket over his arm, his insignia glinting faintly. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. Olivia looked up as he passed her eyes, meeting his for a moment. She nodded just once and he nodded back. The door closed behind him, the bell above it jingling softly. Olivia went back to her clipboard, her pen moving across the page, her face calm but alive. The diner felt different now, like it was hers in a way it had never been before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. The world outside kept moving. The news spread, the story grew, but Olivia didn't chase it. She didn't need the headlines. She didn't need the applause. She'd stood in the fire and walked out whole. That was enough. For everyone watching, for everyone who'd ever been looked down on, judged, dismissed, her silence said it all. You're not invisible. You're not less. You're enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.